Okay, so interesting place where we are with sport right now. Events keep unfolding uh, by the day, it seems. With the government announcement that no fans will be allowed back in stadiums next week, the Scottish government is going down a different path, and they're still in negotiations. And it doesn't look likely that fans will be in Scottish stadiums anytime soon. And the fate of Scottish football is in real crisis. Plain and simple. Financially, no one's really sure how the game is going to survive. A lot of clubs could go out of business. The same could be said, obviously, of the Football League and the Premier League. The Premier League is not immune from the financial fallout. I mean, they're claiming they're losing up to, I think, £100 million per week without fans in attendance. So all the talk in recent years that with the TV deals in place, that the Premier League clubs could let us in for free, that's clearly been proven to be false. It shows how vital match-going fans for a variety of sports are for the continued viability economically of sport. And now the Premier League and the EFL are in talks over a support payment of around somewhere between 200 £250 million to support the lower leagues. Those talks are still continuing. They haven't reached a positive conclusion yet. So that's an interesting subplot. Now the top tier is starting to try and aid the lower levels of the game and make it sustainable. So that's an interesting subplot. Rugby Union said it's going to lose about 60 million in revenue if with the internationals that are coming up if fans aren't allowed back in the remainder of the Six Nations game and the Eight Nations that they've organised this autumn in place of the autumn internationals, where the Southern Hemisphere nations will come up on tour and play the Northern Hemisphere nations, and vice versa. The summer tours that were cancelled as well for the Northern Hemisphere nations going down to the Southern Hemisphere. So Rugby Union's announced losses. The ECB obviously have cut staffing levels and have announced an early estimate around 100 million. It could be as high as £380 million in losses. So professional sports had some financial body blows in recent months. On the side of the League Cup, obviously Leyton Orient couldn't go ahead with their game against Tottenham because players tested positive for the virus, and there's concerns there about the future of the club there. They're disappointed that the game was called off and that Tottenham were given a bye in the League Cup. So we're now seeing a rise in players and coaches testing positive for the virus. It started with Gundogan at Man City, now David Moyes and two West Ham players, and now several members of the Leyton Orient squad have tested positive. So there's rising concern about the integrity of the competition and whether we will need another sporting lockdown. On the Newcastle United takeover, there's no more news. The same question keeps getting asked. There's nothing else to report. There's no news there. On football takeover business, Ryan Reynolds is being linked with a takeover bid at Wrexham, and that is no joke. People thought that was just a PR stunt. That is actually a legitimate takeover bid from Ryan Reynolds, the actor, the Canadian actor. He plays Deadpool. So that could be interesting to see how far that gets and if that is approved by the Football League and the FA and allowed to go ahead. Bear in mind, Wrexham currently sit in the non-league, but that is a very interesting subplot when it comes to football. In the Rugby League and the NRL, the Newcastle Knights suffered an embarrassing loss to the Gold Coast Titans away from home. Their away form has crippled them this season. So going into finals football now that the South Sydney Rabbitohs beat historically the Roosters with a record-breaking 60 points to 8 scoreline at ANZ, that changes the mix-up for the finals positions. And the Canberra Raiders could swoop in if Parramatta also slip up against Canterbury this weekend. The top four isn't set in stone who finishes where. So the NRL, that's getting really interesting. Two massive blowout scores today, where two favoured teams lost to two teams that weren't expected to necessarily win. So real interesting scorelines there. The Roosters, whether they deliberately threw the game or not, I would say if you're going into knockout style football and you want to win a competition, you want to win on a positive and go in with form, and that is not going into the next stage of the competition with any form. That I think is they're throwing the game. That's a big risk to take. Saying, we think Penrith is an easier route considering how dominant Penrith were in the regular season. And the Storm have shown a few cracks without certain players in their squad, and they've got a player yet this weekend. So I would say it's a big risk to take to deliberately tank in a game. And give up momentum. There was some cracks exposed, and they've also had some injuries out of that game as well. So I wouldn't say that was a very wise decision by the Roosters to not put in the effort against the Bunnies. I think that was a very dangerous, and it could backfire. And it just shows how hard it is to win back-to-back titles. And they're trying to go for 3 in a row. That's not a way to go into finals football. Playing like that. That was an absolutely embarrassing second half. And they started the game really well, and they were leading. So absolutely shocking second half. I think that's a very dangerous game that they're playing if they are deciding to go in and try and avoid the storm. The best teams, win. It doesn't matter who you're playing. I think they're not going to win. I don't think they're going to win the grand final. I don't think they'll be there in the grand final. There have been a few cracks appearing in the Roosters this season that have been exposed at times. Although when they've won well. But at times they've shown a few weaknesses, and I think looking at that, they only rested 3 players. There was a lack of effort there. There was a lack of intensity there, and there were too many mistakes. They were a lot of mistakes in that Roosters performance. I don't think they have intentionally thrown that game and not played to their fullest ability. They've lost Jake Friend to a broken cheek, so that in itself is a risk when you're not going in with full intensity. It can backfire, and I think that will backfire. I think to try and say it's an easier path to play the minor premiers. I'm not so sure, but we'll have to see how Penrith play later on this weekend and how they come through. And because I can't see a weakness in the Penrith Panthers the way they play, regardless of their strength of fixturing and all that. I think it's a big risk. I will take a different route. I think they probably made things a bit more difficult for themselves. And if they're going for 3 in a row, that's not the way to do it. You want to put down a marker going into final saying, look, we're ready to go here. I think Newcastle the same. They were really poor today, and their away form has been concerning throughout the season. Their away form has been troubling, and their lack of consistency. So it's a difficult one. 2 blowout scores today that highlight how competitive the NRL is. And at the same time also highlights that if you do go in half-assed and without effort, it's not a good look. If I can't for one moment believe that the Roosters would go in and go, we're not going to win this game. We want to lose this game, because to lose that badly going into finals football, that can be a rot setting in and make it more difficult for them to go on and get to the grand final and win. You want to put down a marker, you want to put down intensity, and to lose by a record scoreline as well, I think would be embarrassing. The lack of fight they showed for large portions of the game would be very troubling if you were a Roosters fan, and bring a lot of heart to the Storm, the Raiders, the Eels, the Panthers. They're going to be looking at this going, well, they are beatable. They're not this machine that's been winning and playing grand finals and winning. There is weaknesses there, and I think they will be exploited in the finals. To take out a couple of key players from that team, it's not a good look. And I don't like it when teams tank for a variety of reasons, but to deliberately lose a game so you get a slightly different draw in what are classed as the knockout stages, basically. We've seen it at Football World Cups where it's backfired. We've seen it at Rugby Union World Cups where it's backfired, where you've gone, we want an easier draw to the final, we'll play tactically, and it can actually affect the confidence going into, going into the finals. Well, the previous 2 years, there's a reason why they were the best team in the end. They turned up for key crunch games, and I think this was a key crunch game. It shouldn't matter who you play. You got to beat the best. And if you're saying, we're worried about the Storm, we want the Panthers were the best team in the regular season. Regardless of who they played, you had to play what's in front of them, and they played with confidence. They built momentum, and they only lost 1 game so far. So I'd say, if the conspiracy theories are true and that's a deliberate tanking, then that's a dangerous risk for the Roosters to take. I can't see, Trent Robinson telling his players not to try hard. It's a star-studded team. They came out the blocks really quick. They were leading after a few minutes, and then they imploded. Now, whether the Rabbitohs were fired up after last week's defeat at Canterbury and they wanted to put a marker down, I think that would have angered Wayne Bennett and motivated the team to say, look, we need to bounce back after a disappointing defeat the week before. But watching that Roosters game, it was just, the second half was utterly just not good enough. I will say this about any sports team: you don't win every game. Okay, even Penrith have proven they can't win every game. They've drawn one and they've lost one. So the Panthers have even proven to, even though they've had a record-breaking season so far and a record-equaling season, they've still got to play and win their last game. And teams have been criticised like the Melbourne Storm and the Canberra Raiders for resting players in going into the last game of the season. There are some risks attached with altering your lineup, tinkering with things, and taking the foot off the gas. And that, to me, is a big risk that some of these teams are taking going into the first round of the finals next week. Players want to go out there and win. And the fact that they didn't need to take the foot off the gas to get an easier draw in the past 2 years tells you that they were on an off day, and it was quite worrying that you take a couple of players out that side, how exposed they were, especially down that left-hand side or that right-hand side defence. Without Joseph Manu in the centres, they were quite obviously exposed. It's a difficult one. I mean, Tedesco, they shut him down. Flanagan had a poor day off the kicking tee and a poor day in the halves. Keary had flashes, and is clearly a key player going forward. But you've lost Jake Friend at hooker. You could say Boyd Cordner, is he 100%? With the concussion issues he's had, Crichton wasn't great today. So they were poor, plain and simple. They just weren't good enough. And the record book suggests that if you concede 50 points, you don't go and win the grand final. No team's ever done that. So now they've made their job more difficult going forward for the next 3-4 weeks than otherwise it would have been. So, and the concern is losing Jake Friend as your starting hooker is a concern, because Verrills is obviously long-term injured. So that's a concern as well. Same could be said for the Newcastle Knights, their implosion against the Titans. And they didn't rest players. So 2 teams going into finals on the back of heavy defeats, a response is required. And the Roosters have made it harder for themselves to go on and win the grand final. They should just take each game as it comes and aim to win. So I don't buy the throwing the game or the tanking. I think they just gave up. They gave up. They got blitzed in the first half in a very short period of time, and they just gave up in the second. And that for me is a shocking performance. But I say this: no team wins every single game. That is an exceptionally hard thing to do. Even Penrith have proven, you can lose a game. So defeats happen, but the manner of the defeat will be concerning going forward, because they're trying to do something that hasn't been done for such a long time, winning 3 in a row. That just hasn't been done in the modern era, and they've made their job harder. And the history books are saying, well, if you concede 50 points, you ain't going to win the grand final. It'll be interesting to see what Parramatta, the Raiders, and the Storm do, and the Panthers do, and what kind of results they have, considering the Raiders and the Storm are resting a lot of players. They're resting between them. They're resting basically a full squad of players between them, and people have complained about that. And then you look at Penrith, and they're playing Canterbury, and Canterbury are a dangerous opponent. They're going to be a difficult opponent to play against, and they want to finish on a high. And Parramatta, I mean, crikey, if they lose and Canberra win, they drop out the top 4. And again, the history books say you have to be in the top 4 to win the NRL Grand Final. So there's a lot of subplots going on going into the first week, but that was a really, really poor game by the Roosters. Really poor. There can be no debate on that. And the Newcastle Knights as well were equally poor. So there's been a couple of really poor showings. And Brisbane getting the wooden spoon. I mean, this has been a crazy 2020. Who would have thought Brisbane would have got their first wooden spoon? I think they're the last club to get the wooden spoon as well. Every other team has had wooden spoons, and then the Broncos get their first one. I mean, who would have expected that after the first 2 weeks of the season, that the Broncos would be wooden spoonists and coachless and without a CEO and without any new signings for next season? Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that? The Roosters would have suffered a record defeat. The Rabbitohs would have got a record win. And I think it's the first time they've scored 60 points in a game since the 30s. So records have been broken this season. And of course, there's other debates as well about the possibility of having a fourth Queensland side at the Redcliffe Dolphins, worth 100 million according to their chairman, which would automatically make them the wealthiest club in rugby league. There's that subplot as well about trying to expand the game going forward and whether that will go ahead in the next year or two. There's the debate about should they bring in an 18th team, Perth, Adelaide. I mean, the fact they're taking State of Origin and they've been going to Perth and Adelaide, they're going to Adelaide this year, says to me that the NRL were testing the waters and they were planning to test the waters before the COVID shutdown about trying to see what the crowd numbers would be like in Adelaide and in Perth in recent years. So expansion of the NRL is a hot topic at the moment. Should there be a second team in New Zealand? Should there be another team outside Sydney and New South Wales? These questions are being raised every season. So there's a lot of interest going on at the moment and a lot of debate about the state of the game. These experimental rules they've been tinkering with, do they add or help? Do they add to the game? Do they will they be a permanent fixture next season? We'll have to see what the response is after they look at the data on those experimental rules, whether they actually help or hinder the game, and the feedback on that. So there's a lot going into this finals series. There's a lot of questions there. Really, really interesting. Looking at things. I mean, if the season had been a full-length season, I would have thought the Titans would have beaten Cronulla to the last final spot, if not possibly pipped Newcastle. So you could say the Titans have just come up short. Had the season been a 25-round season, I think they would have got in with the way they're playing. So that's another interesting subplot. But there's a lot to debate, and the NRL's got very, very interesting all of a sudden. But that Roosters performance, I've never seen defending Premiership team put in a performance that bad. And if people are saying, they deliberately tanked to get an easier route to the grand final, the history books say if you lose by 50 points plus, you ain't going to win the grand final. So, and the fact they didn't need to do it in the previous 2 years tells you that South Sydney side were obviously wanting to put a performance in after the week before off there and defeat the Canterbury. They wanted to put a marker down saying, we are going to be underdogs, and the record books could be broken this season. I mean, we could have a team from outside the top four winning the grand final. We could have a team who has conceded 50 points this season win the grand final. It's not without the realms of possibility, but I think the Roosters have made things harder for themselves. It is what it is. I've never seen a defending Premiership team play that badly. Plain and simple. Never seen a team play that badly. So we'll have to see what happens. We will have to see what happens. And the response with State of Origin obviously now being played this season at the end of the season, will that be the long-term positioning of State of Origin? That's another question, because some players will have a month off before going into Origin camp. So the debate about will State of Origin stay at end of season or go back to traditional format from next year, that's another question that's going to be answered, I think, over the off-season, whether the NRL decides to keep that fixture in that kind of way, remove the bye rounds. There's a lot of interesting subplots going on in regards to the NRL and what it's going to look like in the next season and seasons going forth. But yeah, no, those 2 games today, that was a lot of points scored as well. So really some good tries scored. Alex Johnson now has got the try record. He's the try score leader. He could be crowned the top try scorer for the season. I think that's yes. I was discussing about the Premier League giving this emergency release of funds to the lower leagues. There are some sticking points like Birmingham City. They sold a player for 30 million, I believe. Yeah, but the debate about the salary cap and stuff. I mean, if you take away promotion relegation, then you basically have just changed the complete and utter structure and the traditional structure that's been in place since the formation of the Football League. And if you take away relegation, that rewards failure. I think the issue that currently is in place is the parachute payment system, and the lower league clubs obviously want to make it to the Premier League because that's where they can make more money. Championship clubs. There'd be a lot of championship clubs that I think would vote against blocking promotion relegation. I think that I mean, if let's say Leeds and West Brom had not got promoted, I think they would have really protested. There was clearly a divide between the haves and have-nots, and I think the governance of the game has failed long before the coronavirus pandemic came along, long before the March shutdown and the exposure of how financially mismanaged the sport has been for a very, very long period of time. There is no hiding from the fact that the financial management and the governance of the game has been poor for a very, very long time. I think the Premier League basically trying to ring fence themselves is a very worrying precedent going forward. And even they're saying they're losing £100 million a week in lost revenue. So that does highlight how key we as match going fans are to the health of even the biggest clubs. The debate around football finances and clubs going bust, if you were to ring fence the Premier League, you've just killed off the aspirations of 60 clubs plus. You've just killed off the aspirations of 70 clubs. That in itself highlights the division. And I don't think it's right for the Premier League to dictate what the rest of the Football League clubs can and can't do. Promotion relegation is built into the Football League system, so you would have to have a vote on it. And there were already threats to have a breakaway Premier League 2, but then Leeds got promoted, so those threats sort of disappeared. There's a clear divide even within the Championship with the haves and have-nots. And League 1 and League 2 already proposed a salary cap to the Football League and the FA at the beginning of the shutdown. They said we need a salary cap in order for us to survive regardless of whenever we restart. I'm not a massive fan of how football governs itself and how the Premier League has just proven how dysfunctional football is. I mean, the Scottish leagues are in the same boat. There's talks about, let's take Rangers and Celtic out of Scottish football and put them in the English league system. You've just killed Scottish football there and then with just that decision. The fact that the government basically have now said the earliest we plan to have fans back in attendance is sometime in March, be it the beginning or the end of March, just tells you the situation we find ourselves in. But the TV deal that is structured heavily weighted in favour of the Premier League. The Championship clubs are very angry with the way the EFL handled their TV deal. So the EFL is already at war with its clubs. The Premier League's at war with the EFL. The clubs and players are at war with each other. The PFA is giving all this advice saying don't take pay cuts, don't take wage deferrals, and the hard-working staff of clubs up and down the land from the top flight through to Stevenage at the bottom of League 2 as last season because Macca's would have gone bust or being furloughed and laid off. So the economics is broken massively, and you've got clubs like Tottenham who furloughed their staff at being in lockdown, just signed Gareth Bale on a season on loan on £600,000 a week where they're paying £300,000, but they can't afford to pay the base salaries of the lowest paid at the club, including the club shop assistant, for example. That just shows how the economics is broken and how the system is broken and how the FA, Premier League and the EFL have allowed it to get to this stage. I mean, the EFL already, there's a lack of trust with fans in the EFL. The reason why we have a Premier League is the same trust was broken between clubs, the fans, the players, and the FA and the EFL back in the late 80s, early 90s, which led to the Premier League being formed. There was concerns about the TV rights, and they have been proven correct with their heavily biased towards the top end of football. And clubs at the lower level are going bust. So, the way they're trying to basically dictate to other clubs is wrong. They're not the only sport having financial difficulties right now. Rugby union's in the same boat. They've tried to ring fence the Premier League there, and that's hit back with really harsh criticism from a lot of parties, including a lot of the clubs in the Championship. Rugby League tried to ring fence the Super League for a while. That ended up causing more economic harm to the lower levels of the game, which is not got fixed anytime soon. So, the finances of sport and the governance of sport is a mess in this country. There's no denying it. It's an absolute mess. It doesn't matter. The sport we talk, it could be football, it could be rugby union, it could be rugby league. Ice hockey goes from crisis to crisis. Um, the financial and just general mismanagement that we've had for the best part of 2-3 decades has led to this point. Now, some experts were saying the football money bubble's got to burst. It has to, but it has to stop working at some point. And you know, it's reached a point now where this pandemic and the economic effects have been felt, and has exposed a lot of the lies that we were told that fans can go in for free because the TV deal means we don't have to actually, because they admitted, they claimed that they could let us in for less than £10 each and still make massive profits. That has proven to be a lie. It proves how valuable we are as fans, and I don't think fans would say ring fence the Premier League, because you've just killed the aspirations of every club from the Championship downwards, and then you do risk having a division between the haves and have-nots that's already widening and has widened. Before the Premier League was a thing, club finances were far more stable than what they are now. The TV deal was partly responsible for the mess that we are in. And the last TV deal that the EFL signed with the Championship, League One and League Two, the breakdown in trust between clubs and the governing body is very much there, and fans have no trust in the Premier League and the EFL and the FA. I just see it online. Social media is an interesting barometer of where people feel the situation is. You just look online, honestly, just look online and look at the anger, especially on Twitter. That's an interesting one. Facebook, not so much. YouTube, not so much, in the sense that we have YouTubers like me and others who will regularly criticise individual players for poor performances or teams or organisations. You look on Twitter at the average fan and their response to a lot of the decisions and actions happening with clubs struggling well before the pandemic. So the Bury situation really highlighted the anger that a vast majority of fans have towards the EFL and the Premier League and the FA, and it is growing. And if the Premier League owe the FA money, they've got to pay up. They have to pay up. And the anger growing on social media, because that's an outlet for fans. 15 years ago, we didn't have this outlet. 20 years ago, we didn't have the outlet. The growing social media now means you can organise protests against bad club ownership. There's been regular protests outside of EFL headquarters and Premier League headquarters in London, regular, from angry fans. It's like the Liverpool protests. I mean, Liverpool, okay, they're a club whose fan base does divide opinion, but Liverpool as a club, the 77th minute when they started walking out over the price of tickets, and fans in the Kop walked out. Fans at Newcastle walking out last season when Mike Ashley was trying to organise what is now proven to be the failed sale of the club for how many times he's tried to sell it. It's ridiculous. Social media has started, a trend, and when clubs started furloughing staff with or without pay, but the players weren't taking pay cuts, social media, the reaction, the protests, the anger, they realise now it's a PR nightmare. And it doesn't help when players regularly misbehave during lockdown as well. The reaction, there's a growing cynicism amongst sports fans. When you look at these highly paid elite athletes, there's a growing cynicism there, and it boils. And that has become a breaking point. And people were saying, especially experts were saying, this money bubble in football has to burst at some point. I think this is the bursting point. It's just highlighted all the mismanagement and the poor governance and the poor oversight and the reckless spending of individual clubs, but also the weaknesses of the financial fair play rule, which even UEFA have admitted doesn't work. But they've tried enforcing it, and they've been beaten in the Court of Arbitration for Sport by the 3 clubs they try to enforce it against. So the system in place doesn't work, and there is no, and there has to be a salary cap. But I think right now, will the players agree to it? Will the players agree to a salary cap? Probably not, because they've become so entitled and so comfortable with the fact that their agents can get them paid on huge contracts, which they don't deserve, which are unjustifiable. But you know, there are those saying, "Ah, but you want to attract the best players." Okay, fine. Um, so be it. But you need financial stability in order for that to be sustainable. And as we've seen with Barcelona, it's not sustainable because they're overpaying players, and there's clearly a breakdown in trust between the playing group of Barcelona and the board. Um, when the PFA came out and advised their members, so the players, against taking pay cuts or wage deferrals, so don't reject every offer that your club's put on the table. That didn't help when non-playing staff were being furloughed. It was a very bad PR move, and the clubs felt the backlash of that. You know, and the system is broken. I always say this. To be a professional sportsman is a privilege, not a right. That privilege can be taken away very, very quickly. And yeah, I think football risks harming itself irreparably long term. Oh, look, Barcelona. I mean, they obviously are owed money by PSG because the transfer market is based. You don't get paid your full transfer fee in one go. You're paid in installments. It's like a mortgage. It's like a loan. You pay it back, and the transfer system is creaking, which is not helping with finances. This is where lower league clubs are basically trying to flog their best players to patch up their messed up finances. And there are some clubs in the Championship and League One that have been at Premier League level. This is where ring fencing will create a massive division and a breakdown of the league structure. But yeah, Barca are trying to claw back money any way they can because they're owed money on loads of transfers that are paid in installments, and then you know the whole thing is a shambles. The guy who even came up with the parachute payment system says the system is being misused and is broken. The TV deal was broken. The whole system needs to be restructured, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of hurry and willingness to do it. And financial fair play, as we know, doesn't work. So a salary cap needs to be enforced. And I don't think the players' union will be willing to sign up to that. It just shows how out of touch they are. Yeah, some of these clubs are really out of touch with the situation. Some of these players really are. And figures like Daniel Levy, for example, have to try and justify, paying £300,000 a week for a player who's injury prone and his attitude sucks. But Gareth Bale's obviously got a very good agent because he spent most of the last 18 months being paid to play golf. So his agent is obviously very, very good. But this is the problem. Player agents have, a lot of undue influence over how the sport goes about its business, and the debate about the role of player agents is something to be discussed. Rugby league in Australia is having the debate about the role of player agents and how they have a massive impact on salaries and overinflating player wages. The debate's been had in football about some of the some transfers where there's been some very shady dealings with player agents. Very interesting dealings with player agents where they're not disclosing full tax. I mean, this is where the Newcastle United video I did on their tax fraud investigation is linked to player agents and tax fraud and money laundering. And so, unless you can fully regulate, and there's a code of conduct that is compulsory, you have to sign up to, and there's a regulatory body, unscrupulous agents are part of the problem that we find right now in sport. Football at the forefront, but then other sports like the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, rugby union, rugby league, motorsport. There are some very unscrupulous agents who are manipulating the system, and they manage to manipulate it so they obviously can get their commission, right? And they want to make as much money as possible. That's why they try and get these overinflated transfers and overinflated wages, because they get a commission from their clients, the players, or the clubs. And then that forces other clubs and other players to seek bigger fees, which are unsustainable, especially for clubs on not so great finances. And then it snowballs. And what we've got now is this unsustainable business model, because player agents are actively shopping around individuals. Like they're going even without the consent of individuals and negotiating, moves and bits and pieces. And it's been highlighted in the NRL. It's been highlighted in European football. That there needs to be greater transparency. When you have tax fraud investigations and money laundering investigations that centre around the role of player agents, there's a concern. Straight up, there is a concern. And the issue isn't going away. The issue ain't going away. Oh yeah, look, the UK went to £2 million worth of debt back in August, so that's not new news. That's news that came out a couple of months ago. I remember me and my old driver at work were discussing that the UK just got into 2 trillion worth of debt in real terms. In actual terms, it varies on what you class as actual and real debt and all sorts. And economics is just a minefield. But yeah, sports finances has obviously been highlighted in the last few days, and obviously with the announcement that fans aren't allowed back into stadiums and arenas, has a knock-on effect. And TV companies are going to get a bit more difficult, because obviously they want to sell a product that looks a healthy product. Fans in stadiums is a healthy product, right? But what I've noticed in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, especially with things like the FA Cup and Challenge Cup, I'm noticing a lot of empty seats. And the last 2 Challenge Cup finals have been the 2 lowest attendances since the Second World War. So big sporting events, empty seats is a big thing. We can debate the pros and cons of the pandemic and the lockdown and the regulations and the jobs market and a whole host of things. The whole situation is a mess, but that's not a sports discussion. And I try and keep politics off this channel. I try and focus on the sport, except where the politics comes in with a not allowing fans into stadiums, government decision. Scotland is an interesting one, because there's still debates whether they can get fans back in soon, because the Scottish government has devolved powers, but I can see them following the UK government going forward. But yeah, without fans in attendance, it's starting to, the costs are starting, the losses are starting to mount. The meeting that was had the other day between all the heads of all the sporting governing bodies and representatives and the government, the culture, media, and Minister for Culture, Media and Sport, the concerns about finances were raised, and it's not a good look at the moment. The EIHL has said it's not going to have a season until fans are allowed back in, so they're indefinitely suspending this season. Scottish football, rugby union across the board, lower leagues English football, they're all raising their concerns about the financial implications. Now, I think rugby league can be shielded over the winter, because it's basically summer sport and their season's winding down. But even the ECB, a summer sport, is saying that we're losing anywhere between 100 and 380 million. It depends on the source you read and what press release you read from the ECB, and they're saying we have to cut 1/5 of our budget. So 62 employees, full-time employees of the ECB have just lost their jobs. So several sports governing bodies are seeking government handouts. Now, the RFL's already had one. So that's an interesting subplot. Is the RFL have already had a government handout, and they were banking on with the Challenge Cup, their big showpiece event, having fans in the semi-final double header up at St Helens and the final at Wembley, and obviously that's not now taking place. So that's going to cost them a lot of revenue. And it's losses that I think the RFL can ill afford with the Rugby League World Cup obviously next year. Will that take place on time? Will that go ahead? So that's something to bear in mind with the situation. There's a whole load of issues that have come to the forefront in the last couple of weeks. With the trials they were having with getting back into fans back into stadiums. There was positive signs. There was positive consultation, and then suddenly this decision early this week to say no, not happening on the first. The lower leagues are allowed to have fans in stadiums below the National League. So in football, at lower levels, fans are allowed in. So I do find it interesting, but the whole situation is not good. And now we've got players testing positive, and we've got coaches testing positive, like the Wakefield Trinity. They've had players test positive. They've shut down their club. They're self-isolating the squad. West Ham, Leyton Orient, Man City. It's a worrying trend that now high-performance athletes are testing positive. So there are some concerns that we might have another shutdown of sport, which will then have a knock-on impact for the Euros next year, the Olympics, the Rugby League World Cup. I did my video on the Rugby League World Cup, and will it go ahead on time? Will it take place this time next year? And several things are key to that. Not having a sporting shutdown, not having a disruption to the Super League, not having a disruption to the NRL in Australia. Fans actually being allowed back in, no local lockdowns. So a lot can happen in 12 months. But the RFL needs that tournament to be a success and needs ticket revenue. So that in itself is interesting if the Rugby League World Cup will take place on time, because it needs fans and attendance to be a success. Because they're obviously trying to grow and sell the game to a wider audience outside the UK and Australia and New Zealand. So they're trying to grow the game in new markets. They need fans in attendance. They need a tournament to go ahead. The Ryan Reynolds takeover bid for Wrexham, that is an actual thing. It is taking place. That is an actual bid. That is legitimate. That is on the table. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Wrexham. But look, Russell Crowe, another famous actor. He owns the South Sydney Rabbitohs in the NRL. He bought the club and turned their fortunes around. So, it's not unheard of film stars like Ryan. Was it Ryan? Who was it? Newman, Gary Newman, a guy from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He had his own race team. He had his own NASCAR and IndyCar team. So, famous actors have been involved in sports team ownership before. It's nothing new. And a lot of people, every time a famous celebrity, Elton John, is obviously his involvement with Watford. So it's an ongoing thing. It's not a new trend. It's an ongoing thing where wealthy individuals will invest in sport. It's good for PR. They invest. So it's nothing new there. But that's the thing that's going on. The guy with Ryan Reynolds, I think he's from what I was watching on the news report. I think he's involved with the supporters trust at Wrexham. He's involved with the supporters side of things, and he has been involved with discussions with Ryan Reynolds apparently for quite some time. This is not I think that's just happened overnight. This has been a long-term planned discussion to see if there's any way it can get off the ground. And I actually do believe, there's a bid to buy Wrexham, a club that used to be in the Football League, has obviously fallen on harder times, is now playing in the non-league. But there is a plan to make obviously Wrexham a viable and more viable and get it back into the Football League where it belongs. We'll have to see what happens with Wrexham, and I mean the stadium needs some development, and there needs to be some investment there anyway. And it's there's been issues with Wrexham off the field, and they have struggled, and they have fallen out of the Football League. So the whole Ryan Reynolds getting involved is a surprise to many, but a lot of these celebrities, a lot of these wealthy people, they see this as an investment, and it's a good PR move on their point, getting involved in a regional community that needs investment. And if money pours into the Wrexham area, they can redevelop the ground, for example. When fans are allowed back in, it will create interest. It starts to grow interest, and that's something that needs to happen. But there is fan involvement with that takeover bid as well. I think the guy who's facing the bid, he's involved with a supporters trust, and is local as well, which is important. I think obviously they need to obviously pass the fit and proper persons test and a whole host of other things. But the process will be very similar to what happened at Newcastle, in the sense that they have to go through a director's test. They have to prove that they have the money, a whole host of things. But Ryan Reynolds is an exceptionally wealthy man. He can afford to buy Wrexham. But yeah, Russell Crowe did it with the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new. I mean, yeah, Paul Newman, I think it was Paul Newman, actor, set up his own racing team, which is still going now, by the way. It's under a different guise. His estate sold it on, but celebrities have been involved with sport dating back a long time. I mean, you just have to look at Elton John and Watford, still involved with the club today. The Hearns involved with Leyton Orient. So there are some big names in the celebrity world who have a lot of money and are interested in investing in sport. It's nothing new, but some people agree with it, some people don't. Some people see it as PR stunts, but I genuinely believe from all the reports that are coming out about Ryan Reynolds and Wrexham that this is a legitimate bid that may gain some traction and may actually be allowed and become a takeover. So we'll have to see what happens with Wrexham and how the bid progresses. But from everything I've read, it is a legitimate takeover bid. There is no reason to doubt it. So we shall see what happens. Well, this is the problem with, I think, English football, is it's heavily reliant on individual wealthy benefactors investing and buying the clubs. And this is the issue that I think sport has faced. If you look at the German model, there's more fan involvement in the day-to-day running. They have involvement in who's on the board. There's fan representatives on the board, and they have a bigger say in how their clubs. That's the German model, in how clubs are run. If you look at the Spanish model and the Italian model, they elect club presidents on set fixed terms because they have memberships. So again, they have involvement. The same in rugby league in Australia. There again, club memberships. Again, they have a say on who's on the board, who's the chairman. They regularly vote on club decisions. So we have to look at the model of club ownership and who's involved with what and who's any ex-Premier League club. Oldham, ex-Premier League club, Swindon Town. I'm a Blackburn fan, of course, so I would love to see Blackburn back in the Premier League and with different owners, because our ownership's a mess. Wigan, Bolton, Hull. It's quite a few. But people are surprised that Swindon Town and Oldham were in the Premier League back in the day. Leeds took a long time. Leeds took 16 years to get back. Nottingham Forest is another one. Sheffield Wednesday is another one. There's some real big clubs that, if you were to ring fence the Premier League, would be quite against that because they've been in the Premier League, and there'll be a lot of resistance. It would have to go to a vote, and the division in football and the lack of governance and the squabbling. It's ridiculous. The health of the game and the future of the sport in this country is at grave risk. A whole host of clubs, even Premier League clubs, are risking have had gone into administration before and been, had financial problems whilst being in the Premier League. So to ring fence the Premier League, there won't be a European Super League. There just won't be. There's no appetite from the majority of clubs and the majority of football associations. They're very much against it. Plans have been put on the table, and fan groups, even from these newly wealthy clubs like Man City and PSG, they are against it. And if you can't get the fans on board, it's just not going to work, because you can't sell a product with empty stadiums. You know what I mean? We've seen how the TV companies have kicked off about stadiums being empty or reduced capacities because it looks like the product's not healthy. They're trying to sell this to a wider audience. So the urge to get fans back in. There won't be a European Super League. There's already criticisms of the current Champions League and Europa League format. And let's say you take Celtic and Rangers out of Scottish football, you've just killed Scottish football, dead. A sport without rivalries, historical rivalries, is nothing. And you take some of the biggest clubs out of the domestic competitions, you just killed the domestic competition and you devalued it. So I can't see that working. I really can't see that working at all. You just look at if you just look at the reaction of fans and players to La Liga's plans to take regular season games outside of Spain to the US, and the threats of strike, it just tells you all you need to know about the Super League idea. It does not work. There is no appetite for it, apart from a few very wealthy individuals who see it as a cash cow, and it won't be a cash cow. It will be an absolute horrendous idea. The reaction of fans will tell you everything you need to know. I went to the sport without relegation promotion. What's the point? Because some leagues obviously have a top tier, and then minor league affiliates. That only works in certain systems where there is actually financial constraints. So ice hockey is one where it is a very expensive sport to run and invest in. And over in Australia, the promotion relegation doesn't work because, again, population based and economics. So economics does have a part to play in a one league system. But I don't think other leagues will be in favour of a Super League because that lure of getting the big money's there. But as I say, you take some of the big clubs out, you've just killed the domestic league competitions dead. You've just taken the biggest fan bases out, and then it doesn't become, because this is where the smaller clubs love these big FA Cup ties against the bigger clubs because they can get more crowds in, they can sell out stadiums, they can put themselves on a map. TV revenue goes up, exposure goes up. And the Super League idea has been muted. There's been meetings had. Only a handful of clubs have signed up for it, and you notice they're all recently rich clubs that want to stay rich, that have no history at all, but until the last decade or so, they were struggling to get to the top tier. They suddenly got money. They're back at the top tier. PSG and your Man Cities. But you look at the fan reaction against that idea. Fans have already kicked off about concerns to do with the Champions League and Europa League and the travel, and there's been a negative reaction to having Euro 2020 as it was, now Euro 2021 across a whole continent. Again, fan travel. Yeah, no, you'll just have loads of plastic tourist fans and there'll be no atmosphere. It will be, yeah, money talks, but then again, when that's just from TV money and fans don't want to turn up, because if you take Real Madrid out of La Liga, the other clubs suffer. So in the end, the actual health of the sport in general suffers. For one club to be greedy, over the other 17, 18, 19, plus the whole league system but beneath it. You take out Rangers and Celtic from Scottish football, you've killed Scottish football. Look at Welsh football. You've taken Cardiff, Swansea, Newport, and Wrexham out of the Welsh league system, put them in the English league system. Welsh football is crap. You know, I don't think you could justify, oh no, but seriously, you take the old firm out, you've just killed Scottish football. You've just killed it. I don't think Aberdeen, Hearts, the Dundee clubs, Motherwell, Hibernian can sustain Scottish football without the old firm. You've just killed your biggest revenue and you've taken that out of the league. Yeah, you could still have domestic fans watching the Super League, but then the actual other 95% of clubs die. You know, they die. They will have less revenue because they've lost out on hosting the big club at their stadium, selling out their stadium, and they will vote against it. Plus, the domestic FAs have said you'll be, if you leave, you're thrown out of our competition, and if you want to reapply, you have to start at the bottom tier. So they've automatically the idea of it makes no logical sense unless the champions of each league go into a Super League for a season, like the Champions League. You make that you knock out competition, and then they have to play in that for a year, and then the next champions go in and represent your league. That's the only way it would work. A British league wouldn't work, not with the logistics. Wouldn't work. You wouldn't get enough away fans at games. Can you imagine going from Exeter to Inverness on an away day? No, I can't either. The travel costs would be prohibitive, and you would have lower crowds. What do I think about English clubs selling their young players to abroad and trying to buy them back overinflated? There's a reason why these young players want to play abroad as well. They're going to get more first team football, and there you go. That's all you need to know. It's kind of difficult to bring in Hearts into the English league system when they're now in the second tier of Scottish football because they got relegated because they were crap. I'm not going to lie, Hearts got relegated from the SPL. They're not in the SPL this season. They're now in the Championship. So Hibs might be the idea you're looking for there. At the end of the day, no, you still take the big Scottish clubs out of Scottish football. Doesn't matter if it's only 2 or 3 of them, like Aberdeen, Rangers, Celtic. You've just killed Scottish football. And you take Hearts out of the Scottish league system. Who are Hibs going to play in a local derby? You've just killed off their 4 biggest matches of the year, home and away, before cup games. It doesn't make any logical sense because without fans, you ain't got a game. You've got a hobby played by enthusiasts rather than a sport played by professionals. This is why a Super League idea would meet a lot of resistance, even though it may be very lucrative. The domestic FAs have said if you form a Super League, you are going to be kicked out of any sanctioned domestic cup competition. And then if you want to reapply, you've got to start at the bottom. Can you imagine Real Madrid and Barcelona starting in the bottom tier of Spanish football? That's what will happen. The Spanish FA told La Liga, you cannot take games to the US. We've decided to back out the idea because of the backlash. And yeah, the players weren't in favour of it. Just because the club chiefs are doesn't mean the players are. If you can't get your own employees on side and they're going to threaten to strike over moving domestic games out of Spain to the US, a Super League will not take place. That's what the Champions League and Europa League's for. And already there's complaints about the structure of the Champions League and Europa League, that there's fans and players aren't happy with the group stages. Managers are pissed off with fixture congestion, and they took away the Cup Winners' Cup. So if you can't get your players on side, you're not going to get your fans. And when fans in Spain were against taking La Liga games out of Spain, yeah, you're not going to get a Super League to work. There's your nutshell. It just doesn't make sense. Plain and simple, doesn't make sense. Because then you've got to try and sell this to the domestic countries, so the fans domestically, and then you've got to try and sell it abroad. And if you've already got the fans going, we ain't going to watch this, we're going to boycott, then you've already, lost a bit of a foundation. If fans will boycott, you're just going to get the plastic tourists in, and that's no atmosphere. And you look at some of these European and British clubs, the atmosphere is intense. You take that atmosphere out. I know fans aren't allowed in at the moment. You take the fans out of it, you ain't got nothing, and the players realise that. The players, like this time last year, the La Liga players were like, "We will go on strike if you take games to the US. We'll strike." And the Spanish FA refused to endorse La Liga's decision and threatened to basically kick all the La Liga clubs out of Spanish football and told them to restart at the bottom. And they were like, "Oh, we can't do that." So, the Americans. The Americans aren't even in favour of these games necessarily going on the road here as well. I think there's been a burnout of fans. The London series. It is a cash cow the NFL has gone after. The debate was, and the NFL did plan to have a team in London. That's met with no traction. They already planned to have a team here by now. They were planning to have a Super Bowl in London at this point. I think that idea is starting to run its course. The players weren't happy with games going to Mexico, and that's in the same time zone. So you can just imagine having a team full time over here. We've seen look what happened with the Toronto Wolfpack and the Super League, and how they can't complete a season and they may not exist next year. There comes a point where sport becomes too global, and the Toronto Wolfpack highlighted all the issues of having a transatlantic team in a European location and vice versa. So you put a North American team in a European league, didn't work. Imagine the same with the NFL. Just the visa issues alone, and the difference in time zone, currency, tax rates. It's ridiculous, and the Players Association, the Players Union, I don't think are in favour of it long term. So I don't know how you do it. The Toronto Wolfpack is an example about how a transatlantic team doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's a failing system, because they already had issues attracting players under the visa restrictions. They're a team based out of Canada that plays most of its games in the UK. I mean, that makes no logical sense. The KHL will not have a team here. The NHL doesn't even want to put a team here, because the NHL has already shelved the idea of having a 40-team league and a European division. That was put on the table 20 years ago in one of those think tank sessions where they get people to put forward ideas for expansion and relocation. They regularly have these meetings in head office. The KHL, the KHL. I mean, there's already the domestic German league, Scandinavian leagues, the French league, our leagues, the Alpine league, like Slovenia and Austria and Italy. There's already professional ice hockey leagues here. They don't want a KH. They will also resist having. And there's no team in London anyway at the top level. So, I don't know. Well, I'm a fan of the NHL, and I do obviously wearing some NHL gear, and I have more hockey gear in my collection. I can't see how a KHL team will work when we've now only got teams in two of the four nations' capitals, as the Edinburgh Capitals have gone out of business, and there's no top flight team in London. How's that going to work? And you think of the travel. I mean, the other teams in Eastern Europe, some of them have pulled out of the KHL because travel and time zone difference. And the KHL has a shocking record when it comes to look after its overseas players. Shocking. The KHL has a lot of issues with corruption as well, and really. You have to listen to some of the interviews of some of the overseas players that have played in the KHL, so the North Americans and other Europeans who played in Russia to say that they were treated abominably. They were treated really badly, not paid properly. I think the KHL would meet a lot of resistance, and players had to give up on their family, wouldn't see their families for long periods at a time. Visa issues as well won't work. Um, yeah, if the MLS wants to put teams in the Champions League, they already have the Copa. Is it Copa America, Copa Libertadores, or wherever it is, the American Champions League version between North and South. They already have like a similar Champions League in the Americas. Just imagine that, playing a midweek game and coming back. That would be ridiculous. Thankfully, that hasn't become to fruition because, again, player welfare. It's not just the quality difference, but player welfare. Absolutely, 100%. And the RFL, the Rugby Football League. Yeah, they want to have the team in Ottawa for next year. They can't even get Toronto to work. So I can't see that actually being successful somehow. I think they're trying to grow the game in the wrong areas. And yeah, growing rugby league in North America is a great thing, but they already have a semi-professional league structure on the East Coast. Focus on developing that to make that fully professional. Give them a better TV deal, better investment, rather than just going, we'll set up a team here arbitrarily where there isn't a team before. Just make some of the decisions the RFL have taken harm the game massively. And the Wolfpack fiasco shows what a waste of money that was. They're not even guaranteed to play next season. And there's no relegation from the Super League this season because they've basically not existing. So I don't know what's going to happen. And the RFL already had to get government assistance to bail them out during this crisis. They haven't done a damn thing. There's a reason why rugby league is losing money in this country. They can't even grow it in this country properly. And the Challenge Cup final proves that the last couple of years. Oh yeah, I mean, look, the NHL has taken some preseason games now and played local teams in recent seasons. And yeah, the NHL, yeah, there was a game in Belfast. The Boston Bruins came to Belfast and played a preseason game. That is feasible. But at the same time, obviously this pandemic needs to die down and travel restrictions need to get lifted. But it is feasible in the future for the NHL to, keep doing the European series, where they take a couple of regular season and preseason games, exhibition games over to the Europe, because they know there's a fan base in Europe. They know that the best European players are playing in the NHL. They want to give something back. I think that's the way to do it. But I think it was the Boston Celtics CEO, because the Boston Celtics come over here a lot, and the NBA comes over here and plays in the O2, which is the old Millennium Dome for those who are old enough. Those young who don't know what the Millennium Dome is, it's the O2. Just naming rights. The Boston Celtics CEO was interviewed, I think it was in 2018. He was interviewed at the time the Celtics were over here. For the NBA regular season games being played on the international series, and they posed the question because the NFL obviously were very keen on a London team and the Jaguars coming over here, and they interviewed him, and they said, "What's the likelihood of a North American franchise coming over here or being expanded over here from like the NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball, and of course the NBA?" He went, "Not a hope in hell. Not a hope in hell. It wouldn't be a long-term viable." Viable. If one of the biggest sports franchises in North America, one of the biggest sports teams for finances, their chief executive officer, their chief operations officer, whatever you want to call it, says it's not going to happen, it's not financially viable, I think the NFL are going to find it's going to be more and more difficult long term to have a team in London on a permanent basis. I did not hear about the Blackburn Hawks and the Manchester Storm. Could you please inform me? I haven't really been following ice hockey news really. As soon as the Elite League announced it was suspending play this season, that basically said to me that the lower leagues probably won't take place either, and no fans in attendance. It just doesn't make it viable to play games with no fans because of the finances. But what is the news about the Hawks and the Manchester Storm? Because I am now intrigued, very intrigued about this. Have a look. Yeah, Major League Rugby. Yeah, the rugby league in the US and Canada could do what Major League Rugby has done, but again, it needs investment and structures put in place and player recruitment. But Americans and Canadians, a lot of them can't distinguish the difference between union and league. So, um, but they do. They. It doesn't matter if you. Oh well, in that case, if these two teams are supporting each other long term, that's good for the future of the game. Uh, I think that is the way forward. I mean, the sport in this country goes from crisis to crisis, where teams struggle financially and can't afford to pay players. We've seen it with Cardiff Fire and Invicta having a crowd fund, and Milton Keynes Thunder and Milton Keynes Lightning, the Edinburgh Capitals, Basingstoke and Bracknell having rink issues, Slough Jets dropping down. I wouldn't. Would I say that unions winning the battle between the codes in the US and Canada? I mean, at the moment, yes. But at the same time, it's a very West Coast sport in the US and Northeast corridor. It's played a lot at university, and they've attracted a lot of American football players that haven't made the NFL, the CFL, to come play, and they realise, I can be professional at a decent wage and start off and get some exposure. Rugby league is predominantly played on the East Coast, and there is a semi-professional league in existence. That is a good basis to build a professional league out of it. But again, it needs investment. It needs sponsorship. It needs a player base that can play at a decent enough elite level to make the quality level good enough. Major League Rugby's done that. There's enough high quality players from Europe, South America, and the Southern Hemisphere who've gone over. So there's lots of Africans, Australians, Kiwis who are professionals who've gone over to ply their trade. A lot of Europeans playing in there. They're allowed so many overseas players, so that actually helps with development of the local based players. They are fully professional. So I think Major League Rugby's got a good healthy starting point. So we'll see what happens with both codes. But if you want to grow the game, you can't just go right. We'll put an expansion team from rugby league over in Europe, over in North America. It's proven not to work with Toronto. I'm just going to say that out right now. It's a vanity project with Toronto. It's failed. It's been an expensive failure. It does nothing to grow the game. Personally, in my eyes, it's doing nothing to grow the game. Yes, the Toronto fan base is brought into it, but look at the struggles Toronto have had in recruiting players, retaining players, and actually being able to play games. There were issues with visas and player recruitment that have killed them. I can't see how Ottawa's going to work. Quite frankly, I can't see how that's going to work going forward. And Toronto aren't even sure. Toronto say they are, going to be playing next season. We don't know if sport, how many teams are going to survive to next season, and the state of the game next season. So it's a difficult one. Wakefield Trinity Wildcats, they're having to quarantine players right now and postpone games because players have tested positive. So I can't see how Ottawa's going to work. But oh god, next, yeah, absolutely. The whole thing is miles in the future. There seems to be no coherent plan right now with direction sport should take. There's no coherent plan at all. So I wouldn't. We've got to get through the next 3 to 6 months, and without fans in attendance, that's going to be difficult for a lot of sports financially. And the debate about government assistance, we just don't know what state of play things are going to be in come March. How many sports teams will go out of business? How many elite athletes who are, let's say, Olympians will just retire from their particular field of athletics or sport because it's not economically viable because the government grants have dried up. We just don't know what state it's going to be in. From what the UK government are saying, it's going to be sometime in March at the earliest, probably the end of March at the earliest. So a full year after the lockdown measures were introduced would be the earliest we can get fans back in stadiums in any kind of capacity. So that's the benchmark we're looking at is sometime in March. That's 6 months away. 6 months until we can get fans back in is the likely outcome. But we just don't know what's going to happen. A lot can happen within the next couple of weeks, but it looks like March at the earliest as things currently stand. There's some rumours saying January, but I'm going to go mid spring next year. I'm going to say early 2021. I can't see it happening over the winter, and I can't see that being anything but negative going forward. I just can't see anything before Easter, basically. Oh yeah, look, we saw that the Jacksonville Jaguars were the first team to allow fans in their stadium. So yeah, I can't see anything before 2021 really. So I can't see anything before Easter at the earliest. That's my personal opinion, and from what reports are saying, that's what's likely to happen. Is sometime in the spring in 2021. But then that puts pressure on events like the Rugby League World Cup and the Euros to take place because they are the amount of investment put into these events. They need fans there, otherwise it just makes no sense having them. And the Rugby League World Cup really does need fans in attendance to make that a viable tournament financially for the organisers and the RFL. Without fans there, it's going to make a loss. The Olympics without fans there is going to make a loss, and that's been a huge investment by the Japanese government in the Olympic Games. So you need fans at these events, otherwise it just doesn't make economic sense to have them. Same with the Euros as well. We don't know if that's going to go ahead because it's being hosted pan-European. That again, different countries have different, regulations on allowing people in public spaces, so that's going to prove difficult logistically. Is what it is. What do I think on politics being involved in sports? Well, I've made it very, very clear. Apart from when the politics impinges on sports, like allowing fans back into stadiums, government loans, which is what we've seen across the world. When you actually have political movements getting involved in sport, we've seen it in the Olympics and how damaging that's been. Personally, I think sports should be apolitical. We've seen how divisive it has become and damaging to the brands and continues to be divisive. I don't think it helps. I'm trying to stay apolitical. I try and keep politics off this particular channel. The other channel is where the politics goes. But I think politics should stay out of sport as much as possible. But we've seen it in the Olympics with sporting boycotts that have been politically motivated, where governments have said we are boycotting this event for such reasons, including the 1980 Olympics and the 84 Olympics, where nations boycotted and created diplomatic problems. So I think that we've seen it in the Olympics. We've seen it in athletics with the ban Russian athletes, and that is somewhat politically motivated and does nothing to help the situation. I think it creates further division and further mistrust. We've seen how politics is involved with bidding for international tournaments such as the Olympics, the World Cup, and things like that. That in itself, again, creates a sense of suspicion and division. So yeah, I try and keep my views on politics separate from this channel to the other channel. And even then, I'm very apolitical these days. I've got no particular love for any political party or politicians right now. I think they're all equally inept and just as bad as each other. Personally, that's my opinion on it. But Conor McGregor getting arrested again—that's news to me. But then again, I don't really care what Conor McGregor does because it's ridiculous. And UFC and Dana White, they're enabling his bad behaviour by allowing him to keep making money. Let's see what he's been arrested for. Let's see what the arsehole's been arrested for now. What's he done? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at what the arse has done now. Controversy. Let's have a look. Driving offences. He's had 2 driving offences. The incident at Bellator 187. Bus attack at UFC 223 Media Day. UFC 229. The robbery arrest last year. Pub assault. Oh dear, this latest one. Okay. Wow. Right. Yeah, that one's I think the worst. The one that happened in Corsica 15 days ago. I've only just read about it. I think his antics over the last 3 or 4 years is troubling, very troubling. But he's not the only MMA fighter to have quite a litany of offences. Crikey. I think the French police are still investigating, which I don't think helps. The French investigative process is very slow, and they're known to be a pain in the arse, and they can drag things out. But no, his colourful private life and the amount of legal troubles he gets himself in, it's a matter of time before a judge or a jury or a court of law really does hand him a very significant punishment. Very significant punishment. But the fact he's getting away with just fines, he pays a court fine, for assault or driving offences. It comes a point where you have to get tough, because what's happening is the bad behaviour is being enabled because he's not being adequately punished. And UFC and Bellator and the other fight promotions, they need to, really take a tough stance with, what goes on away from their events, away from the sport with these athletes, because it brings the sport into further disrepute. And MMA and UFC and Bellator and other promotions have had difficulty in certain countries giving them the license to operate and allowing them to operate. And it doesn't help when it's a constant stream. It's not just one incident; it's multiple. And whether he's innocent or guilty, he's still being arrested and charged with offences and investigated for offences. And this is 3.5 years of legal troubles that he's had. And yeah, I wasn't aware of the latest allegations, partly because I haven't really been following a lot of, I've been following the NRL quite religiously, but I haven't really been following a lot of sports. Really, I've been taking a bit more of a backseat in recent weeks. But the Conor McGregor allegations, I mean, you look at his previous rap sheet, it's getting more and more worrying. And we've been here before with other high-profile boxers and MMA fighters and other sports stars in a variety of sports who've ended up going to prison for very serious offences. And it's a matter of time before he does something that requires a custodial, and they won't look kindly on it because of, and it's going to be a fall from grace. There's only so long it can continue before, it becomes untenable. But unfortunately, people keep buying the product and keep buying in, and Dana White and UFC keep him hanging around because it sells their product, which I'm not a fan of anyway. But it is becoming to a point where it's getting more and more reckless. And it's not just him. There's others. There are others. There are other high-profile athletes who have very troubled legal issues off away from the sport that they participate in. But his actions outside the octagon, because that's what we've got to call it. They're high profile, and they are troubling, and they're getting more and more serious each time. And alcohol and drugs seem to be involved in a lot of them. And the Corsica bar incident, that Hmm. I don't know how long it can continue. I know he's famous and he's in the public image, but I don't know how long it can continue. I mean, Mike Tyson went to prison, so it has been done where like they go, right, no, enough's enough. You are going to jail. Sorry. Um, there will become a point where he does go too far. Whether the French authorities want to proceed with an attempted prosecution. We're talking about Conor McGregor and his latest misdeeds, but it seems to be every 6 months he's in the press for something. If you look at his track record, how many incidents he's had um, over the last 3.5, 4 years, they're getting more regular um, and more troubling. What started off with traffic offences by speeding and not paying parking fines has escalated to, you know, decent exposure and assault and robbery and it's getting to the point where the people advising him aren't doing a very good job. Um, the people around him. Yeah, I mean, and Tyson as well. Mike Tyson. He's actually been to prison, so I think. And yeah, the pub assault, how he only got away with a fine and some community services, I think in my mind an absolute joke. How he escaped prison at that magistrate. I mean, that is an indictment of the Irish legal system there, not giving him a custodial. But we've seen Ben Stokes and Alex Hales go to court with their antics outside a bar in Bristol. We've seen Paul Gascoigne in court, for a variety of offences. You know, there's been other high profile instances of athletes going to prison. So it's troubling. But my view on it is he's basically getting away with bad behaviour because he's not being held to task well enough. He's being allowed to get away with too much for too long, and it's a point now where I don't know what you do because it's a pattern of behaviour that is very very worrying, and it doesn't seem like there's a way to change that pattern of behaviour. So it's not as if like he just had a couple of driving convictions for speeding, which he's had, and that was that. It's gone on to assault and now these latest allegations, which are very very serious in France, which can lead to some lengthy time in prison. So um, we shall see what happens with the French authorities. I mean, it only took place 15 days ago. Whether they want to proceed with them and investigate and charge him, that's up to the French police. But legal issues are dogging him now, and for all his success as a MMA fighter, that's fine. But his off out the octagon antics, his colourful antics and private life are detracting from his clear skills as what he does um, as a mixed martial artist. But yeah, I don't know. What he's done now is quite serious, and yeah, doesn't look good. But it's quite similar to what's going on in the NRL at the moment with several high profile incidents of players misbehaving. I mean, the Jack DeBellin situation, he's facing very serious charges that could land him in prison for up to 15 years. Um, but these incidents keep happening, and yeah, he did get absolutely battered by Khabib, and deservedly so. But Dana White, technically his employer, um, keeps promoting him, and he keeps, they're interested in just the money, and that's the problem. There's no sanctions. There's nothing. The legal system has been very soft with him, partly because he's got money for a good lawyer. But if you or I did this, we are, yeah, definitely doing some time. Um, and this is the difference. If you're not wealthy and you do what he's done, you are getting the book thrown at you. So there's a matter of time before the public opinion really turns against him, and enough's enough. And I think with what we've seen over the last 7-8 months, I think public opinion is starting. There's a growing frustration of the fact that if you're wealthy and you commit an offence and you can just get away with it, and if you're poor, you're stuffed. There is a growing dissatisfaction with how the legal system is working in very, very various countries, and the optics of this, the negative attention the media is giving makes it harder for UFC to sell itself in certain markets where it wants to get an operating license to operate and host events. Same with Bellator. Same with the other minor promoters. For them, Australia, for example, is putting up resistance to UFC and Bellator. They're starting to make life a bit more difficult in granting the promoters to operate and have a license to promote and host events. So if these negative headlines continue and his rather disturbingly erratic behaviour continues, it makes it more difficult and it just justifies the authorities saying, "No, we're not welcome. You're not welcome here." And boxing is going down the same path as well as some of these boxers, getting up to no good out of the ring and out of the gym and committing offences. It's nothing new. Same's happened with rugby union and rugby league player. There's this capacity for sports to self-harm themselves when high-profile athletes in said sports, get up to no good, bring the sport into disrepute. So I use the Jack de Belin example in rugby league. You could use a whole variety of football players over the years with their legal troubles that they've had off the field for a variety of offences. Rugby union has had various scandals. Cricket's had players go to prison for various things. So, at the end of the day, the sports themselves need to take accountability about how they deal with improper behaviour by their athletes. Plain and simple. And yet they still get these massive sponsorship gigs. They're still getting paid a lot of money. And some of them, organised crime and boxing go hand in hand. I don't care if it's an Irish gangster or an American gangster or Russian. Organised crime and sport goes hand in hand. It has done for time immemorial. There's money to be made, be it legitimately or illegitimately. You can bet your dollar organised crime has got something, some fingers and some pies. Especially with the martial arts and boxing and the blood sports, there's definitely been an undercurrent of organised crime linked to professional boxing, professional MMA, and a whole variety of other sports, including professional rugby union, rugby league, football, cricket. Organised crime has had links with professional sport for forever. Go back to the time of the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, criminals were making money out of sport. Club owners have been indicted on criminal charges of teams. So yeah, there have been high profile cases of individual players getting caught up with organised criminals. I mean, Diego Maradona, there you go, there's one. When he was in Naples, Napoli, there were links. The Camorra had big links with him and his agent, and it's a thing. The sad thing is, professional sport really doesn't care where the money comes from, as long as the money comes. And that's the problem. There's a lack of transparency in who funds what in sport, and especially in professional sport, where there's lack of state involvement, and it's down to individual company. I mean, there's a corruption investigation right now involving Bernard Laporte, the head of the French Rugby Federation, linking him in corrupt payments with the Montpellier owner, Monsieur Altrad, who's also somehow managed to get the sponsorship rights for the French national team. So even at the highest level of sports administration, there's links with organised crime and corruption. It just goes hand in hand, especially when you have professional sports, especially which have less state involvement in how they're run and governed. It's a thing. Oh, look, I mean, there are some promoters who have got links with crime. Plain and simple. A lot of the most successful boxing promoters have definitely got links with the murky underworld. It's a thing, and especially boxing and MMA, they need to clean up their act drastically because there is mafia involvement, and those allegations have a lot of truth to them. And there's been a lot of boxers and a lot of boxing gyms and MMA gyms and MMA fighters again linked to organised crime. It's a great way to launder money. Oh yeah, look, we know that loads of boxers and have taken dives because of being paid to do so. It's a known fact that there is corruption within boxing. There's corruption within MMA and UFC and Bellator. It's a known fact. It's there. Same with team sports. There is clearly some results that I look at in a lot of sports going that is concerning that this result has come about looking at the teams on the field and teams on paper. And with the two matches today in the NRL, I'm scratching my head at least at one of them. And how the team played and the result that ended up a record-breaking victory. Yeah, I'm scratching my head at some of the NRL results this season, and some of the football results that we had in the World Cup in 2018 and the Euros in 2016 and the Champions League and Europa League and FA Cup and League Cup. Yeah, there are some results that you look at in team sports and go, okay, I'm questioning that. Plain and simple. And corruption in sport, especially if you look at the Olympics, the IOC, there's been allegations of corruption going to the IOC way back to Salt Lake in the Winter Olympics 2002 and Nagano in 98. So sports administration is not immune from corruption, and professional sports, especially when there's lack of state involvement, where it's down to individual clubs to find sponsors and the players, and corruption's there. There are rules in place to stop it, but it still happens, and it happens a lot more than fans would like to accept. Plain and simple. It's a thing. It's an everyday part of sporting life, that corruption and match fixing, and it's there. You have to be naive to think it doesn't exist. I mean, look at cricket and snooker. There's two sports that have got a lot of issues with match fixing and corruption. Tennis at the mid-level, corruption is endemic. So to say that no sports immune is a lie, I would think somewhat that there are certain sports where there is less issue with corruption than others and criminality involved in it, but it's still there. These issues aren't going away. They're not getting resolved. So it's what it is. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there because, I've run out of things to say, really. If you've got any more questions, but unless there's some real big breaking news about fans and stadiums, any kind of time frame, with fans being allowed back in, and the agreement between the EFL and the Premier League over emergency funds, and will there be government assistance for the RFU, the ECB, and all this. We'll have to wait and see. And the South Korea-Italy game 2002, I think everyone admits that match was fixed. Commentators at the time were questioning the validity of the result. There was another World Cup game 2006, which was highly suspicious in the group stage, and I believed it involved Portugal and the Netherlands in 2006. That raised a lot of eyebrows for the referee. I think it was Portugal-Holland. The most yellow cards ever in a World Cup game and the most red cards in a World Cup game. That was another one that was raising a lot of questions at the time, and still does to this day, with the way that match was refereed. But I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to leave that on that note. And then obviously we'll follow sports news this evening and tomorrow. And then obviously we'll have an idea of where we're at with what's happening. And I will see you guys very, very soon.